Imagine a night so raw, so deeply emotional, that it left Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, and his beloved wife Priscilla crying themselves to sleep. It wasn't just another night in their glamorous, storied life. It was a rare moment of vulnerability that revealed the humanity behind the legend. Picture Elvis, the icon known for his swagger and charm, sitting beside Priscilla, with both of them overwhelmed by the powerful story unfolding on their television screen. The movie they watched struck a chord so profound that it reduced the powerful couple to tears, exposing a side of Elvis that few had ever seen, a sensitive soul who felt the depth of every human struggle portrayed on screen. This story is not only a testament to Elvis's love for Hollywood, but also a window into his emotional depth, a side that has been largely hidden from the public eye. You won't believe the kind of impact this movie had on him, and why it was such a powerful experience that they ended the night in tears. This is a side of Elvis that will truly leave you in awe. Setting the scene. Elvis Presley wasn't just the king of rock and roll, he was also a true cinephile, captivated by the magic of movies. For Elvis, films were more than just entertainment. They were a source of inspiration, a way to escape, and a deep well of emotions that he could dive into after the whirlwind of fame settled for the day. His love for Hollywood wasn't limited to the films he starred in. He genuinely admired the art of storytelling. Some of his favorite movies included timeless classics like It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, and Wuthering Heights, films that brought to life stories of hope, heartache, and redemption. Elvis's taste in cinema was as eclectic as his music. He enjoyed everything from romantic dramas to somber tragedies, all of which fed his emotional and creative soul. This deep connection to storytelling made him not just a performer of songs, but also an admirer of stories that reflected the complexities of life, something that resonated with him on a deeply personal level. That particular night with Priscilla was a testament to their close, vulnerable bond, a bond forged in both love and shared understanding. During this period in their relationship, the pressures of Elvis's fame weighed heavily on them both, and moments like these were precious escapes from the spotlight, a way for them to reconnect away from the chaos of celebrity life. Together, they would often spend evenings indulging in some of Elvis's favorite films, seeking a sense of normalcy and intimacy that the outside world couldn't touch. On this special night, as they sat down to watch The Way of All Flesh, they were not just husband and wife. They were two people, united by their raw emotions, navigating life's unpredictable journey. The movie's storyline, which depicted loss, sacrifice, and a sense of being on the outside looking in, hit close to home for Elvis. As they clung to each other, moved to tears by the film's devastating scenes, it was clear that this was more than just a movie night. It was a shared moment of understanding, a time when the outside world faded away, and all that remained was their shared empathy and connection. The movie that moved them. The Way of All Flesh was more than just another classic film for Elvis and Priscilla Presley. It was a deeply moving story that struck a chord in ways they hadn't expected. Unlike the light-hearted, feel-good movies they often watched to unwind, this film was heavy with emotional weight, exploring themes of loss, regret, and resilience that lingered long after the credits rolled. Elvis, who always had an eye for stories that spoke to the complexities of the human spirit, found himself captivated by the raw emotions that this film brought to the surface. The impact of the storyline, with its powerful portrayal of human vulnerability, resonated deeply with him and Priscilla, as it mirrored some of their own fears and reflections on life. Watching it together allowed them to be vulnerable in front of each other, to let their guard down, and share a moment of deep empathy, a quality Elvis cherished, even as he was known to the world as the strong and untouchable king of rock and roll. The story of The Way of All Flesh follows the tragic journey of a banker who makes a noble yet ill-fated decision to carry a large sum of money out of state. In a cruel twist of fate, he wakes up to find himself robbed of everything, and in an instant, his life spirals out of control. Stripped of his dignity, wealth, and the very identity that anchored his existence, he becomes an outcast, a shadow of his former self surviving among society's forgotten, homeless, and destitute. The heartbreak reaches its peak years later when he finds himself drawn back to his hometown on Christmas Eve. As he peers through the window, he sees his wife and children, now grown, basking in the warmth of the holiday, unaware of the lonely figure watching them from the cold. Though his wife senses something familiar in the old man's presence, she never truly recognizes him, ultimately inviting him in to share their Christmas, a heartbreaking gesture that he declines, choosing instead to leave silently, disappearing into the snowy night. This haunting narrative of sacrifice, alienation, and the love he could never reclaim was what left Elvis and Priscilla so shattered. Its portrayal of human fragility spoke volumes to them, touching on themes that both resonated with and terrified them, evoking a raw, powerful response that led them to tears. 3. The emotional impact. The tearful scene that broke Elvis and Priscilla's hearts was the pivotal moment in The Way of All Flesh, when the protagonist, now a shell of his former self, stands in the snow, looking in through the window of his old home. It is Christmas night, and inside his family, who believes him to be long gone, celebrates the holiday, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and love. The protagonist watches them open their presents, a scene filled with joy that is cruelly juxtaposed against his own isolation. In this quiet yet heartbreaking moment, he is so close to everything he once held dear, but an insurmountable gulf of time, loss, and despair keeps him from reaching out. The audience feels his longing and heartbreak, the depth of his sacrifice, and the silent choice he makes to let his family continue without the burden of his troubled presence. For Elvis and Priscilla, this scene touched something deep within them, a profound fear of being forgotten, of sacrificing everything and finding yourself alone. It was the rawness of that isolation that moved them to tears. They felt the protagonist's pain as if it were their own, empathizing with his heartache and the love that he had lost forever. In her autobiography, Elvis and Me, Priscilla described this powerful scene and its impact on her and Elvis, writing, "We cried ourselves to sleep over The Way of All Flesh, which concerns a banker who plans to carry a large sum of money out of state, only to discover upon awakening the following morning that he has been robbed. Stripped of everything, he takes to the streets, surviving among the derelicts, an outcast." Her account vividly captures the essence of that devastating storyline, the suddenness with which life can strip a person of everything they hold dear, and the resilience it takes to continue forward in the face of such despair. Priscilla continued to describe the heartbreaking final moments of the film, where the protagonist, after years of suffering, returns to witness his family's happiness without him. She wrote, "Sensing his presence but never recognizing him, his wife takes pity on the lonely old man and invites him in to share the evening with her family. He declines, heading down the snowy street alone." For Elvis, who was always deeply connected to the themes of redemption and human frailty, the idea of this man choosing to silently watch his family from afar rather than intruding on their happiness struck a painful chord. It was a reflection of the deep love he felt for those closest to him, a love so powerful that he would rather suffer alone than bring them any pain or discomfort. It was this selflessness, the quiet, heartbreaking sacrifice, that made the film's ending so profoundly emotional for both Elvis and Priscilla. 2. Elvis's connection to the story. The storyline of The Way of All Flesh resonated with Elvis on a deeply personal level, touching on fears and insecurities that haunted him throughout his life. Elvis, despite his larger-than-life persona and the adoration of millions, often felt a profound sense of isolation, a sense that all the fame, money, and success in the world couldn't bridge the emotional gaps he sometimes felt. The protagonist's sudden fall from grace in the film, losing everything and becoming an outcast, mirrored Elvis's fears about his own life. Beneath the glitz and glamour, Elvis feared losing his connection with those he loved, and he carried a deep vulnerability, often masked by his onstage charisma. The film's portrayal of a man watching his family from a distance, disconnected yet yearning, echoed Elvis's own worries about the people closest to him, the fear of letting them down or becoming someone they could no longer reach. For Elvis, who always longed to protect his family and provide for them, the protagonist's fate represented the darkest possibility of what could happen if he failed to keep everything together. The film was a haunting reminder of how fragile his happiness could be, and it moved him to tears because it brought to light those unspoken fears that lurked in the shadows of his success. The impact of the film on Elvis was so profound that he began to toy with the idea of remaking The Way of All Flesh with a unique personal twist. He envisioned his father, Vernon, taking on the lead role. This idea wasn't just about paying homage to a story that had moved him. It was also a way for Elvis to explore the themes of sacrifice, loss, and resilience through the lens of his own family's experiences. Elvis often saw his father as a symbol of resilience, someone who had been through tough times but always found a way to keep going, much like the protagonist in the film. By casting Vernon in the lead, Elvis wanted to bring an authenticity to the role that could only come from someone who had lived through hardship. It was as if he wanted to show the world the kind of strength his father embodied, a strength that was at the core of his own life story. This idea of a remake was also a reflection of how deeply Elvis identified with the character's journey. It wasn't just about acting. It was about bringing to life a story that spoke to his own fears and hopes, and about sharing that vulnerability with the people who mattered most to him. The aftermath. Crying themselves to sleep. The emotional aftermath of watching The Way of All Flesh was something that Elvis and Priscilla carried with them long after the screen went dark. That night, the depth of the story overwhelmed them in a way that few things ever did, and it led to an outpouring of emotions that neither could hold back. The raw pain of the film's ending, where the protagonist quietly walks away from his family's happiness, hit them deeply, leaving them feeling the weight of loneliness and sacrifice. As the credits rolled, they found themselves clinging to one another, tears streaming down their faces. For Elvis, whose life was always so filled with bright lights, adoring crowds, and noise, this was a rare, quiet moment. A moment where the sorrow of the character's loss felt almost too real, almost too close. It wasn't just a movie. It was a reflection of some of his own darkest fears, and in the safety of their shared space, Elvis and Priscilla allowed themselves to feel it all. They cried themselves to sleep that night, exhausted from the emotional journey, but also somehow closer for having shared such an intimate, vulnerable experience. This moment reveals a side of Elvis that many people never got to see, a side that was tender, empathetic, and deeply touched by the struggles of others. It's easy to look at Elvis Presley and see only the legend, the rock star, the showman who seemed invincible on stage. But underneath all of that was a man who felt things profoundly. Elvis wasn't just moved by the glamour of Hollywood. He was moved by stories of sacrifice, hardship, and human fragility, perhaps because they mirrored the emotional battles he fought within himself. He related to characters who lost everything, who felt disconnected, and who struggled to find their way back to what mattered most. This emotional fallout from watching The Way of All Flesh showed that even though Elvis was adored by millions, he had his own fears of being left alone, of being an outsider in the very life he created. It was this sensitivity, this raw humanity, that made Elvis more than just a performer. It made him someone who could feel the depth of every note he sang, someone who carried the weight of the stories he loved, and someone who connected to the world not just through his talent, but through his profound empathy for the struggles of others. This story offers us a rare and intimate glimpse into the heart of Elvis Presley, showing us that beneath the spotlight, Beyond the rhinestones and the iconic swagger, he was deeply sensitive to the struggles portrayed in the stories he cherished. Elvis wasn't just a rock and roll star, he was a man who felt emotions intensely, someone who connected with the characters on the screen in a way that transcended mere entertainment. It's moments like these that reveal the softer, vulnerable side of Elvis that so many people may not know, the side that could be moved to tears by a film's powerful depiction of loss and sacrifice. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever watched a movie that touched your heart so deeply that you couldn't help but be overwhelmed by emotion? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed discovering this tender, heartfelt side of Elvis, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold stories about the King's life. Stories that reveal not just the performer, but the man behind the legend. And stay tuned, because in our next video, we'll be exploring another poignant moment in Elvis's life, one that will show just how much his emotions shaped the person he truly was.